All right, welcome back. It's week 2 of Anytime is Good. Now, with myself, Pastor Jeff, here at Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church in Avon Lake, and I am joined this week with one of my seminary friends, Mr. Reverend, I should say, the Right Reverend Lorin Darst, who's out in Oregon, so on the other side of the country. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, Lorin. The reason that I'm interviewing is because I want people to stop complaining about the length of my beard. So that was, I had one goal and one goal alone, and I want them to go, all right, well, I guess it's not that bad. So you've already done your job. Well done.
Oh, wait, they're not complaining because it's too short?
Right. Yeah, you would think. So thank you for being here. I've known Lorin, we graduated from seminary together for like 15 and a half years ago. And Lorin was the president of the seminary student body during our senior year, and I was president of the senior body. And so we worked together on those kind of things. And we have all kinds of fun stories that we won't get into today because this is meant for public consumption. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a series of questions, 6 questions in total. You can answer however you want, as short as you want, as long as you want. I'm going to have to edit this, so if they're too long, I will chop up your stuff to make it sound like you've kidnapped somebody. Okay, so just be aware of that. And with the way you look, no one's going to not believe me. So you got that background blurred for a reason, and we all know what it is. All right, so the question number 1, and I call this ex cathedra. Okay, so it's the hot seat ex cathedra. For those who are watching, that is the official title given to like a papal bull. Like when a pope speaks ex cathedra, he's speaking from his throne. Cathedral is like the throne church of an area. So ex cathedra is like we were speaking with all power given to you, and there's like all authority. So you were on the hot seat, which I will call and pop up a little visual thing here of ex cathedra. Okay, so question number 1: did you grow up going to church?
I didn't grow up going to church till junior high, outside of my next door neighbors who talked about Jesus a little bit, and I think tried to take me to church. No religious upbringing, at least directly.
Mm-hmm.
In junior high, though, I had a buddy who was looking for I'm still convinced that he was looking for someone to hang out with and to have a friend to talk to at church. Invited me to his church. Although looking back, it might have been his mom, because his mom was really, truly a saint, just truly an amazing woman who had a huge impact on my life. Anyway, they invited me to this little Missouri Synod Lutheran church in town. And I fell in love with it. Something happened, something clicked, and I just loved the liturgy. I took it super seriously. I got super involved. I got so serious because Pastor David Kyle, who now lives up in, I think Vancouver and anyway, Washington area, he told me that when we sang hymns, we were praying to God, which I know now, obviously, but I took that so seriously that I got there early, if I could, to read through the hymns to make sure I was praying properly. That's kind of how neurotic I got about this. And then when I could drive myself, since I didn't have anybody pushing me to go in, I kind of fell away, probably middle of high school. But every time I went back to Little Gloria Day Lutheran Church in Center Point, people just welcomed me and remembered me. And that was kind of where I got my start. My family had deep roots in the Augustana Synod, and donated land to this little church called Valby Lutheran Church, which eventually ended up being the very first sermon I ever preached was in that little church. But
wow.
I went to church there when I was little, once every few years, but yeah.
Wow. So this is kind of like a follow-up with that. You were in middle school, that would have been around confirmation age. Did you do any of that kind of stuff, or did you?
Yep, I believe.
And were you baptized and just didn't go to church, or so? Okay, so none of that. Okay.
Yeah, my sister got baptized on the same day I did, so I was baptized. It was right before confirmation, but I did get confirmed as well.
Oh, did you? Okay, wow, that's really cool. See, I get to learn things in these interviews too. I tend not to ask questions that I know the answer to already. So that's cool. So it started off not much Missouri Synod, kind of fell away, but then, all right. So, but that ties into this. So you had such a deep connection to that. Then you fell away from it. The question I did ask Andrew that I will ask you as well is this: was there? I mean, obviously you're an ordained minister, as I am. Was there a specific point where you felt like you Like you had the call, like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do? Or was it something that was kind of gradual where you went, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do, and you kind of explored it? Or was it truly something where you just went, I know this is what God wants me to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a much larger backstory to this, but for me, it was an aha moment. From the time I was in, I think it was ninth grade, I'd planned on being a physician. I was doing health science, pre-med, and all of that, and was well on the way. Actually did end up getting admitted to medical school right as I was leaving for seminary. But about 2 or 3 years into college, I got this desire to re-engage in my faith life. I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Right.
And there was a super conservative evangelical student group. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know what an evangelical was, to be honest with you. I didn't know what fundamentalism was. And so I went to that event and almost left, because when I walked in, the guy said, hey, my name is Joe, or whatever it was. And I used to drink, and I used to smoke pot, and I used to do other things. But then I found Jesus, and I thought, wow, that sounds really terrible.
You're like, what's this used to language?
And so, but I stuck around, and I didn't, because I'd gone to a Missouri Synod, my only experience with pastors was that they were men. Well, there was this woman there, and I still to this day can't wrap my head around why they invited her to speak. But it turns out she was the campus pastor where I was going to college, University of Nevada. And it was a very small Protestant, primarily Lutheran, but it was supported also by Methodists and Presbyterians. So she kind of started to work on me and drew me into the faith. There's a much longer story about that, but she taught me how to read the Bible. She taught me about the authorship of the first 5 books of the Bible. So I knew that before I had memorized any Bible verses, because even in junior high, I didn't memorize many. But anyway, so she developed a relationship with me and put me into some leadership opportunities and roles. Like there was a community memorial event around, it must have been around All Saints Day. And so there was this event where people from different faiths spoke about what death means in their own faith tradition. She nominated me to speak on behalf of Christians. And so that was one of my first public speaking engagements, stuff like that. And then I got connected to a local church and started leading worship, and everything was just kind of moving along. I was a nursing assistant at the time at the local hospital. I'd been there for like 10 years, and things were just starting to move. And one night, I literally in the middle of the night, I woke up and I sat up in bed and I was like, holy crap, I think I want to be a pastor. So I called up Pastor Ruth, who's the pastor I've been talking about. I called her up and I said, we need to meet for lunch. And we would often go up to the wall, the little Waldorf saloon, to have beer and burgers for lunch. And so we met that day, and I said, Pastor, I think I want to be a pastor. And she laughed at me and said, I know. And so I said, Ruth, why didn't you tell me? And she said, well, you got to figure that stuff out on your own. So that's a very short answer to a long story. It didn't end there. I went back and forth for another couple of years trying to figure out whether I wanted to go to med school or seminary. And it was interesting. The reaction I got back home was primarily, what are you thinking, dude? Put all of this heart into becoming a doctor. Why would you change course? But good friend Catherine, good Catholic friend of mine, she was very supportive, and she said, my only wish is that you would go into the priesthood instead of being a Lutheran pastor. So you can cut that last part out, Jeff.
No, I will absolutely not cut that last part out. So this is a question I have that builds off of that. How did you end up from the West Coast out in Columbus, Ohio?
Well, once again, I disappointed my father.
Well, there you go.
No, I'm joking.
Your human father. Yeah. I'm just kidding.
I'm joking. No, my dad spent a lot of time in Europe when he was in the service and so forth, and he wanted me to have that experience. And so for my graduation from college, he offered me a trip to Europe as a gift. And I said, Dad, actually, I hate to say this, but can I use that money to visit the different seminaries? So I used that money that I would have spent going to Europe to travel to all of the seminaries except for Southern. And that was actually part of my discernment process. And when I hit the ground in Minnesota, I drove over to Wartburg to visit them first and visited Minneapolis last. But when I got to Wartburg, I was like, yep, this is a done deal. I'm going to seminary. It was so clear when I went to, and so I figured I was going to Wartburg, but then I went to Trinity and it was almost immediate. Two things happened. Number one, I think it was the first class I sat in on was Dr. Powell's class, Mark,
Okay.
Grant Eckhart was in there. And
One of our friends. Yeah.
Yes. So I sat next to Grant and he just welcomed me, just treated me like an old friend, set up an opportunity for me to go out and have drinks with someone he knew because he wasn't free that night, and went over to, what was the little bar called across the way? The Monk.
Yeah.
Is
The
it
Monk.
the Monk?
Yeah. The Monk. Yeah.
So I walk into the Monk, and a guy that I would soon learn, his name is John Maroney, was sitting there with this massive theology book, drinking a stout. This is home. This is it. So really, it was Grant or Dr. Powell or John Maroney sitting there just doing his thing. That's how I ended up at Trinity.
Wow. I never went into the Monk, not once.
Really?
I didn't really start drinking beer that much until I got into the ministry, which is a whole other story for an interview for myself. All right, number 3. What does it mean for you? What does it mean to be Lutheran?
I think originally I would have said, or for much of my ministry, I probably would have given kind of what is probably a relatively generic answer. The grace is first. Like, it's all about what God has first done for us. There's no earning my salvation. There's no earning God's love. It's just given. I think that's countercultural in our world, obviously. And so that's part of the reason I believe that I ended up in the Lutheran faith, even though it was specific people who got me here. It was
right.
That's why I really kind of connected to it. But in the last few years, what I've really noticed, when we are being church at our best, and we're not often, in fact, we're almost never church at our best, but when we are following in the footsteps of Luther, who spoke truth to power and who advocated for those who were under the thumb of oppressive authorities, be they religious authorities or otherwise. In particular, I connect that to the passage from Luke that we read worship on Sunday, from Luke 4, where Jesus gets up and his first sermon is about one line: "Today this has been fulfilled in your hearing." After reading the prophet Isaiah, "I've come to set the captive free. I've come to proclaim good news to the poor." So for me, it's my Lutheran identity now is wrapped up in where I believe we ought to be going. And because we're just this massive organization, we're not doing the work quickly enough. And it's pretty frustrating, but I think it's at least in our DNA. And how can we get that DNA to manufacture the actual work that Jesus has called us into? By speaking truth to power, by lifting up the lowly, by welcoming in the marginalized, by being a voice for those who are harmed by, in particular, religious authorities that speak damnation and fear.
Question number 4, ex cathedra. All right, question number 4 is, and I did ask this of Andrew as well, just because I've never had another pastor ask me this: what is your favorite Bible story? Do you have one? Do you have a favorite Bible verse or a favorite Bible story?
I've got a lot of favorites. My favorite verse would be the one from Amos: "I hate your worship." Of course, now that I'm on the spot, I can't remember. I never memorized verses growing up.
No.
So
I'll look it up and throw it up on the screen later. But
perfect.
Yeah, Amos isn't that long. I'll be able to find it.
Yeah, it's the one where Amos says, your worship is worthless to me because you're not caring. My favorite story that kind of, if I'm needing to reconnect with that more tender aspect of God's love and care and mystery, is the story Jesus walking along while they're grieving. They know the ending to the story, but they've already forgotten it, where they've lost hope for the future. Jesus rides up alongside them and walks with them and opens up their hearts to what God is doing, but does it in such a way that they don't recognize Jesus until they break the bread. I love that. But also I love the story of Jonah.
Yeah, Jonah's one of my favorite books. Yeah. It's so spot on.
Yeah.
With human nature. I mean, it's so spot on. So, all right, very good. All right, now you've made it to question 5, which this is, I want to say, a little more fun. This one's still a serious one, but it's fun. And then 6 is going to be even more fun. But right now we're on number 5. Question number 5: do you think Jesus would vote?
Do I think Jesus would vote? Yes, but I don't think he'd stop there.
Okay. Why do you think he would vote? Why would he be involved with the political structures?
Well, because honestly, I believe that that's true, because that's really, if you just read the Gospels, that's primarily what he was doing throughout. I mean, beyond teaching, he did a lot of teaching, of course, but what did he do? He healed people. He stood up to authorities. He challenged the religious authorities. He protected people who society was attempting to stone. He was all about turning everything upside down because of the ways of the world in that day and how power and authority was wielded in such a way that people really did not have access to full humanity. And what he wanted was people to experience the fullness of humanity, in particular the liberation, the liberation that comes from knowing that I am a child of God and that is enough. But also, look at how he challenged people to change their ways. His whole movement, the people he trained to do the work, and what he trained them to do was to impact the world. This wasn't a spiritualized Jesus. Sure, he had obviously a deep spiritual connection with the Father, but his spirituality drove him into the world. It drove him into the messiness of this life. It drove him to care for the widow, the orphan, and the oppressed. And he couldn't have made it more clear. I mean, just look at his Sermon on the Mount. So yeah, I think not only would he have voted, but he would have been out on the streets for civil rights. I wouldn't be surprised if he was knocking on doors, signing people up to vote, because he wanted people involved. I mean, that's the other thing. He wanted people involved. He wanted people to know that they have an opportunity to make a difference in this world.
Good. I like that. This one is truly, I don't know if this will take you long to answer or not. If you could take Jesus to one music concert, who would you take him to see?
That's a tough one. I think I'm gonna have to say Tool.
I'll put on the screen TOOL. Tool.
Yeah.
Okay.
But make sure it's in all caps.
I will. Come on, man. The fact that you just said that to me is insulting. So why would you say? So a lot of the people, the two people that I've talked to from my church who watched the last one, I'm almost positive they don't listen to Tool. So why would you? So if they happen to look them up, one, we both apologize in advance if you don't like it. But why would that be where you want to take them?
Because, well, for two reasons. Number one, they're just incredible musicians. The work that they've done recently, I just find it really intriguing and creative, and really connecting with what's going on in this world. In fact, they were the last concert I saw right before the pandemic really took off. But their song Pneuma really hits me.
Yeah. Breath. Yeah.
Breath, it really hits me in the gut. I mean, we are one breath, grounded here in this together, is what I take away from the song. And it's just a really moving experience to be in the midst of their kind of music with that kind of social commentary. I mean, it's just, I love most, if not all, of their music. And some of it I think is a little bit too fatalistic, but by the same token, I think they assess the world in a really kind of unique way.
Okay, yeah. Now, follow up 6.5. Do you think, would you pay for Jesus's ticket, or do you think he would pay for yours? Because I know you and I talked about that Tool show. I was like, man, that is not a cheap experience to have. But do you think he would pay? Do you think he would be like, hey, I got you, Lauren? Or do you think he'd be like, Jesus, I want to pay for you? Or would you like buy him a shirt at least?
Yeah, well, I'd love to buy him a shirt for sure. But honestly, my biggest hope would be that he would just like work Ticketmaster well enough so that we could get excellent seats. And then if we got those excellent seats, I'm hoping he would, chip in part, because those are expensive seats. But
yeah, maybe some backstage passes, I mean, they're not, that would be nice. So really, you're using Jesus to your advantage, which I think is the goal of every Christian. To use Jesus to our advantage, and it all comes full circle. So yeah. So I want to say thank you for this interview. Yeah, all the ministry that you do, and for anybody else who's still watching at this point in time, know that anybody that I have on here, one, feel free, because I'll tag them. Feel free to reach out to them and say like, hey, I saw your interview. I don't know if you'll do that, but feel free to engage with them. Only nice things. But also know that as a pastor, and this might be true of other professions, but I know being a pastor, as a pastor, there are certain unique experiences that we have within our vocation. Make it so when you make connections with other people that do the same thing as you and actually connect with them, on a close level, they're game changing relationships, because there's only certain people that can kind of get like, yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've lived through that, or I've had a similar experience, or this is how I've approached that. So Lorin, as well as Andrew last week, and other people that I'll be interviewing, they're individuals that serve their communities, their congregations, their communities, that also I look to for if I'm going through something, or if I have need help with advice or guidance. So I say thank you for that, more so than the interview, because if we're being honest, the interview was garbage. Your answers were bad. So I hope I used up part of your day to the point where you're never going to get this time back. And so, but yeah, so thank you. And I really hope God will continue to use you in the ways that you can serve, that are ways that your unique gifts and talents that you have, that were shown to you and made expressed to you years ago, that you still realize they're just as valid today as they were years ago, and will continue to go on changing and affecting people. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.